The Cthar command fleet was a sight of terrifying majesty as it approached the outer reaches of the solar system. Thousands of warships, their hulls gleaming with an alien metal that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light, moved in perfect geometric formations. Admiral Forlag stood on the bridge of the flagship Indomitable, his tall, gaunt figure casting a long shadow across the polished floor. His gray skin was stretched tight over angular features, and his four eyes, arranged in a diamond pattern, surveyed the tactical displays with cold calculation. "Status report," Forlag demanded, his voice a deep, resonant sound that carried effortlessly across the command deck. "All systems optimal, Admiral," reported his second-in-command, Subcommander Krell. "Our intelligence confirms the primitive state of Earth's defenses. Their military capabilities are limited to their immediate orbital region. The conquest should proceed with minimal resistance, as predicted." Forlag nodded, satisfaction evident in the slight curl of his thin lips. The Cthar Empire had conquered 17 star systems in the last cycle alone, and Earth would be but a minor footnote in their glorious expansion. Their intelligence suggested a fractured world of squabbling nations, technologically capable but militarily unprepared for an invasion from beyond their system. "Inform the fleet commanders to prepare for standard conquest protocol. We will establish orbital superiority first, then proceed with the systematic neutralization of their defense centers." "By your command, Admiral." Krell responded with a formal salute, three clawed fingers pressed against the chest plate of his ornate armor. The massive fleet continued its inexorable advance, passing the orbit of Neptune. It was then that the first anomalies began to manifest. "Admiral, we're detecting unusual energy fluctuations in primary weapons systems," reported the weapons officer, confusion evident in her voice. Forlag frowned. "Specifics? Targeting arrays are experiencing random recalibrations. Power distribution to main cannons is fluctuating between 63 and 87% efficiency." Before Forlag could respond, the navigation officer called out, "Sir, gravitational anomalies detected. Our course is deviating by 0.3 degrees. "Compensate immediately," ordered Forlag, irritation creeping into his tone. "Attempting to compensate, sir, but the navigational systems are... they're resisting input commands." Suddenly, the bridge lighting shifted from its standard blue-white to a pulsating pink. A strange melodic sequence, something the humans might recognize as an ancient pop song called "Never Gonna Give You Up," began playing through the ship's communication system. Forlag's face darkened with rage. "Identify the source of this interference immediately." The situation rapidly deteriorated across the fleet. Reports flooded in. Food replicators producing only banana-flavored nutrient paste. Environmental controls adjusting to human optimal temperatures, uncomfortably warm for Cthar physiology. View screens randomly displaying images of Earth felines engaged in various playful activities. After hours of increasingly desperate attempts to regain control, the tactical officer finally pinpointed the source of their troubles: a small space station orbiting near Neptune, designated in Earth databases as Minerva Outpost. This is impossible," stammered Krell, staring at the station schematics on the main display. "Our intelligence indicates this outpost was decommissioned 3 Earth years ago. It's a relic operating on technology at least 2 generations behind our own." Forlag's fury was cold and precise. "Open a direct communication channel to this Minerva Outpost. Now." The main screen flickered to life, revealing a cluttered control room filled with mismatched equipment, some clearly cobbled together from disparate parts. Seated in the center was a human, middle-aged, with wild gray-streaked hair and intense blue eyes behind outdated spectacles. The human was wearing what appeared to be pajama pants and a faded t-shirt with an incomprehensible equation printed across it. "Oh, hello there," the human said casually, as though greeting an expected delivery service rather than an alien invasion fleet. He sipped from a mug labeled "Entropy Happens" while typing one-handed on a keyboard. I am Admiral Forlag, Supreme Commander of the Cthar Dominion Fleet, Forlag announced with intimidating formality. You will identify yourself immediately. Oh right. I'm Dr. Eris Thorn, astrophysicist, hacker, last resident of Minerva. The human, Thorn, glanced up from his screen, seemingly noticing the enormous alien fleet for the first time. You know, your engine configuration is fascinating. Highly efficient quantum compression, I assume, though your radiation shielding could use some work. Forlag's four eyes narrowed. Simultaneously, are you responsible for the system's malfunctions affecting my fleet? Malfunctions? Thorn raised his eyebrows. I wouldn't call them malfunctions. More like non-invasive system compatibility tests. You're all just fine. Nobody's been hurt, right? Your life support systems are operating at optimal parameters. I specifically isolated those from my probes. You dare to interfere with the Cthar Dominion fleet? Forlag's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Your actions constitute an act of war against the most powerful military force in this sector of the galaxy. Thorn sighed, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. Look, you're interrupting my work. I was in the middle of some rather delicate observations when several thousand massive warships showed up, pumping out enough energy signatures to completely skew my sensor readings. He replaced his glasses. Do you have any idea how rare a Neptunian equinoctial resonance cascade is? It only happens once every 387 years, and you've ruined my data collection. Forlag was momentarily speechless. In 300 years of military service, he had never encountered such baffling indifference to the threat posed by his fleet. You will cease your interference immediately, Forlag finally managed, or we will be forced to take action against your outpost. Thorn's expression remained unchanged. I wouldn't recommend that. You are in no position to make recommendations. Forlag slammed his fist down on the command console, causing several junior officers to flinch. The Cthar did not negotiate with terrorists. Terrorist? Thorn interrupted, looking genuinely offended. That's a bit dramatic, isn't it? I'm just a scientist who values his privacy and uninterrupted research time. Forlag had reached the limits of his patience. Weapons officer, target this outpost and prepare to fire. I really wouldn't do that, Thorn said, still maddeningly calm. The weapons officer worked her controls, then frowned. Admiral, main cannon targeting systems are not responding. Secondary weapons, then? Those too, sir. All offensive capabilities are locked. Forlag's rage was now a palpable force on the bridge. Communications. Order the nearest destroyer to advance and eliminate that station. Thorn sipped his beverage again. That won't work either. Indeed, as the destroyer relentless attempted to advance, its propulsion systems suddenly reversed, sending it drifting slowly backward. Then, to the horror and embarrassment of its crew, its forward shield generators activated. But instead of the standard protective energy field, they projected a massive three-dimensional image of playful kittens batting at a ball of yarn, visible to the entire fleet. Now then, Thorn said, setting aside his mug, since I have your attention, this is intolerable. Forlag hoaret. You cannot possibly have the technological capability to override our systems. Well, evidently I do, Thorn replied with a shrug. Your systems are actually quite elegant, but they all rely on quantum state communications protocols. Once I identified the base encryption algorithm, it was just a matter of introducing a cascading feedback loop into your central command networks. Honestly, it was easier than hacking my ex-wife's smart refrigerator. He paused, a shadow crossing his face, though arguably less ethically complex. What do you want? Forlag demanded, recognizing, for the moment, the futility of continued threats. Thorn's expression suddenly shifted, becoming serious for the first time. For you to listen, there's something you need to know, something far more important than your invasion plans. We do not require. There's an entity approaching this solar system, Thorn interrupted. Something I've been tracking for the past 18 months. I call it the Void Echo. It has no physical form as we understand it. It's a cross-dimensional energy being that feeds on consciousness itself. Forlag scoffed. This is clearly a desperate attempt to. Your arrival has accelerated its approach, Thorn continued, ignoring the interruption. Your fleet's massive energy signature has essentially created a beacon, drawing it here faster than my calculations predicted. It was originally months away, but now. He glanced at a display off-screen. We have days, maybe hours. You expect us to believe this fantasy? Krell interjected. I don't particularly care what you believe, Thorn replied, but I can provide data. His fingers flew across his keyboard. I'm transmitting the energy signature pattern now. Run it through your deep space sensors. Look specifically at the quantum vacuum fluctuations in grid coordinates 42-87-103 relative to your current position. Forlag hesitated, then nodded to his science officer, who began the scan. This is a waste of, Krell began, but stopped when the science officer gasped. Admiral, the science officer, said, her voice suddenly unsteady. There's something there, exactly as the human described. The energy pattern is unlike anything in our records, but it's massive, and it's moving directly toward the solar system. Forlag's eyes narrowed in suspicion. This could be another trick. Recalibrate the sensors, Thorn suggested. Check from multiple ships independently if you don't trust your readings. The signature is unmistakable once you know what to look for. The next hour was tense as the Cthar fleet conducted exhaustive sensor sweeps. Multiple ships confirmed the same readings. Whatever was approaching was real, massive, and unlike anything the Cthar had encountered in centuries of space exploration. If what you say is true, Forlag finally said, his voice carefully controlled, why reveal this to us? Why not simply let this void echo eliminate us and solve your Earth's invasion problem? Thorn's expression was grim. Because it won't stop with you. Once it's here, it will consume every conscious mind in the system. Cthar, human, and anything else unfortunate enough to be in its path. And then it will use that consumed consciousness as energy to continue expanding. He leaned forward, his face filling the screen. That's why I've been trying to stop you. Not to protect Earth, not directly anyway. I need your help. Our help. Forlag repeated incredulously. Yes, your fleet's energy output, properly modified and channeled, could generate the resonance frequency needed to disrupt the void echo's dimensional stability. My calculations and equipment alone aren't sufficient. I need a power source on the scale that only your fleet can provide. A heavy silence fell over the Cthar command bridge. Forlag's mind raced through the implications, the possibilities, the potential for deception. Yet the sensor readings were clear. Something was approaching, something beyond their experience. Admiral, Krell said quietly, we should withdraw immediately. Return to Cthar space and report this anomaly to High Command. Several other officers murmured agreement. Forlag held up a hand for silence. And what of Earth? He asked Thorn. Earth doesn't know, Thorn replied simply. Minerva was decommissioned. I stayed because I like the quiet and because I detected the first traces of the void echo 2 years ago. I've been trying to warn Earth's authorities, but he shrugged. Let's just say my relationship with the scientific establishment is complicated. So you have been operating this station alone? Unsanctioned. Forlag's surprise was evident. Pretty much. The supply drones still come every 6 months on automated schedules. Nobody checks what I'm actually doing out here. This revelation sparked a heated debate among the Cthar command staff. Some argued for immediate retreat, others for destroying Minerva and proceeding with the invasion while they still could. A small faction, led by the science officer, advocated for cooperation, arguing that the threat was real and transcended their immediate military objectives. Forlag listened to all sides, his expression unreadable. Finally, he silenced the debate with a gesture. Dr. Thorn, he said, the formal address acknowledging a subtle shift in their relationship. Assuming we were to consider your proposal, what exactly would be required of my fleet? A coordinated modification of your main power conduits to generate a specific oscillating energy pattern, Thorn explained, calling up diagrams on a separate screen. It would temporarily reduce your offensive capabilities, but wouldn't leave you defenseless. Essentially, we'd be creating a massive resonance cascade, using Minerva's deep space sensors as focusing mechanism. The objective? To create an energy frequency that disrupts the void echo's dimensional stability, either forcing it back to its own dimension or making it vulnerable enough to be dispersed. Forlag contemplated this, his four eyes blinking in the Cthar expression of deep thought. Finally, he came to a decision. We will verify your claims independently over the next 6 hours. If confirmed, we will consider cooperation. Admiral, Krell protested. This could be an elaborate trap. Perhaps, Forlag conceded. But if it is not, if this threat is real, then we face something far greater than a simple conquest. He turned back to the screen. Dr. Thorne, prepare your data. We will contact you again in 6 hours. The screen went dark, and Forlag stood silent, contemplating the stars visible through the bridge viewport. In 3 centuries of military service, he had never faced a situation like this. The possibility of alliance with a species they had come to conquer, against a threat neither fully understood. Orders, Admiral? Krell asked stiffly. Begin comprehensive sensor sweeps. I want confirmation from every scientific vessel in the fleet. And, he hesitated, prepare contingency. Protocols for a cooperative defensive operation. The next 6 hours were a flurry of activity across the Cthar fleet. Every available sensor was trained on the coordinates Thorne had provided, and the data was undeniable. The void echo was real, its approach accelerating, and its energy signature suggested devastating potential. When communications reopened with Minerva, Forlag's decision was made. We will cooperate, he stated without preamble. But understand this. If at any point I suspect deception, I will not hesitate to eliminate your station, regardless of the consequences. Thorne nodded, his expression solemn. Fair enough. We should begin immediately. The modifications to your ship's power systems will take at least 12 hours, and, according to my latest calculations, the void echo will reach critical proximity in approximately 15. What followed was an unprecedented collaboration. Thorne transmitted detailed specifications for the necessary modifications, while Cthar engineers worked frantically to implement them. The process was far from smooth. No. Thorne shouted over the communication link, watching a Cthar engineer make adjustments to a power conduit. You're approaching this with too much rigidity. The quantum oscillation needs to be adaptive, not fixed. Our systems are designed with precise tolerances. The Cthar chief engineer responded tersely. These modifications violate 17 different safety protocols. Safety protocols won't matter much when the void echo strips the consciousness from every living being in this system, Thorne retorted. Look, think of it less as a violation of protocols and more as creative improvisation. The Cthar engineer's expression suggested this concept was deeply uncomfortable. Nevertheless, the work continued. Meanwhile, tensions ran high among certain factions of the Cthar fleet. A group of hardline officers, led by Commander Vrex of the battlecruiser Inevitable, remained convinced that Thorne was manipulating them into weakening their fleet for a human counterattack. This is madness, Krell, Vrex argued in a secure communication. The Admiral has been deceived. These modifications are rendering our vessels increasingly vulnerable. The Admiral has made his decision, Krell replied, though his own doubts were evident. The sensor data supports the humans' claims. Sensor data that could easily be falsified. We should take action before it's too late. Across the fleet, the modifications progressed despite the resistance. Thorne worked tirelessly, directing operations from Minerva, his caffeine consumption reaching alarming levels as the hours passed. For his part, Forlag found himself increasingly impressed by the humans' intellect and adaptability, though he would never have admitted it openly. As the deadline approached, Thorne detected the first direct evidence of the void echo's proximity. A strange distortion appeared at the edge of Neptune's orbit, a warping of space itself, as though reality was being bent by an unseen force. It's beginning, Thorne announced grimly. The void echo is manifesting. Across the Kthar fleet, sensors registered the distortion. More disturbing were the reports from crew members nearest to the phenomenon. Sensations of dread, invasive thoughts, and in some cases, temporary loss of consciousness. All ships report status on modifications, Forlag commanded. 87% of the fleet is prepared, Admiral, reported the fleet coordinator. The remaining vessels require approximately 40 minutes to complete their adjustments. We don't have 40 minutes, Thorn interrupted. The manifestation is accelerating. We need to begin the resonance sequence now, with whatever ships are ready. Forlag hesitated only briefly. Proceed. All completed vessels, move into formation Alpha 7. Unfinished vessels, withdraw to minimum safe distance. As the Kthar warships maneuvered into position, the space distortion grew more pronounced. What began as a barely perceptible warping now appeared as a vast, undulating darkness that seemed to absorb rather than merely block light. Those who gazed upon it directly reported seeing impossible geometries and experiencing thoughts that did not feel like their own. Initiate primary sequence, Thorn instructed. His face on the communication screen was haggard from exhaustion, but his eyes burned with intense focus. Power conduits to 70% capacity, oscillating at the frequencies I've provided. The Kthar fleet began to glow with an eerie, pulsating energy as the modified power systems activated. Streams of controlled energy arced between vessels, creating a complex network of light that surrounded the encroaching darkness. Minerva Station is now linking with your sensor grid, Thorn reported, establishing resonance pattern. The outposts, dishes, and arrays pivoted in perfect synchronization, channeling the energy from the Kthar fleet and focusing it into a coherent pattern. For a moment, it seemed to be working. The darkness recoiled, its edges becoming more defined. Then catastrophe struck. Explosions rocked 3 Kthar vessels simultaneously, disrupting the carefully calibrated energy pattern. Alarms blared across the fleet. What happened? Forlag demanded. Internal sabotage, Admiral, came the response. The affected ships report that critical systems were manually overridden. Forlag's suspicions immediately fell on Vrex and his hardliners. Identify the saboteurs and secure those vessels immediately. But the damage was done. The disruption in the energy pattern had not only weakened their efforts, but seemed to have provoked the void echo. The darkness surged forward, tendrils of non-light reaching toward the nearest Kthar ships. Wherever these tendrils touched, crew members collapsed, their minds simply absent. The resonance pattern is destabilizing, Thorn reported urgently. I'm attempting to compensate, but Minerva's systems are overloading. We need to re-establish the full pattern within 3 minutes, or the opportunity will be lost. Forlag made a swift decision. All loyal vessels, protect the pattern integrity at all costs. Security teams to the sabotage ships restore their systems immediately. He paused, then added, I am taking personal command of response efforts. Prepare my shuttle. Admiral, Krell protested. You cannot risk yourself. This is not open for discussion. Forlag cut him off. Dr. Thorn, can you stabilize the pattern long enough for us to restore the damaged vessels? Thorn's hands flew across his controls. I'm redirecting everything Minerva has. Life support, auxiliary power, my personal coffee maker. It's all going into the sensor array. But it won't be enough unless you can get those ships back online. Forlag's shuttle launched from the flagship, accompanied by a squad of elite Kthar security forces. They boarded the nearest sabotaged vessel, the cruiser Inexorable, finding its corridors in chaos. Half the crew were unconscious, affected by proximity to the void echo, while others were engaged in confrontations between loyalists and Vrex's conspirators. Secure the engine room, Forlag commanded his team. Restore power to the main conduits. Fighting their way through the ship, Forlag personally led the charge into the engine room, where they found a group of hardliners attempting to completely disable the power core. Stand down immediately, Forlag ordered, weapon raised. Admiral, you've been deceived, replied the ranking officer among them. "This human will destroy us all. Your short-sightedness may have already doomed us," Forlag replied coldly. "Restrain them," he ordered his security team. "Engineering staff, restore power configuration immediately." As the engineers worked frantically to undo the sabotage, Forlag received alarming reports from across the fleet. The Void Echo was expanding rapidly, now engulfing several outer vessels. Minerva itself was under direct assault, tendrils of darkness probing at the small station's makeshift shields. "Dr. Thorne, status report," Forlag demanded over the communication link. Thorne's image was breaking up, static disrupting the transmission. "Station, critical overload, maintaining pattern but can't hold much longer." The human looked physically pained, blood trickling from his nose as he strained to maintain the complex calculations necessary to sustain the resonance. "Hold position. We are restoring power to the sabotaged vessels now." The inexorable engines hummed back to life, its power conduits rejoining the resonance pattern. Forlag immediately departed for the next disabled ship, racing against time as the Void Echo continued its advance. Aboard Minerva, Thorne was pushing the station's systems, and himself, far beyond safe limits. Consoles sparked and smoked around him as he manually rerouted power, bypassing safety systems and melting circuitry in the process. His hands were burned, his lungs filled with acrid smoke, but his focus never wavered. "Just a little longer," he gasped, blood now flowing freely from his nose and ears as the psychic pressure from the Void Echo intensified. Forlag succeeded in restoring the second vessel, then the third. The resonance pattern began to stabilize, but the Void Echo had advanced much closer during the disruption. Now it loomed directly before the fleet, a vast nothingness that seemed to consume not just light, but reality itself. "All vessels restored to the pattern, Admiral," reported Krell. "But the Void Echo's advance has accelerated beyond predictions." "Dr. Thorne, what are our options?" Forlag demanded, returning to his flagship. Thorne's response was delayed, his image barely visible through the interference. "Need final resonance pulse. All ships, maximum power. Through Minerva. That would overload your station completely," Forlag realized. "You wouldn't survive." Thorne managed a pained smile. "Already committed. Need fleet. Synchronized pulse." "My mark." Forlag understood what needed to be done. "All vessels, prepare for maximum power discharge on Dr. Thorne's command. Synchronize targeting systems on Minerva Station." Across the fleet, power built to dangerous levels. Warning systems blared as conduits glowed white-hot with contained energy. On Minerva, Thorne made his final preparations. The station was falling apart around him, systems failing catastrophically as they operated far beyond design parameters. With bloodied hands, he executed the final sequence. "Now," he commanded. The entire Cthar fleet discharged simultaneously, hundreds of energy beams converging on the small outpost. Minerva's arrays captured the massive energy surge, channeling it through systems never designed for such power. For one brilliant moment, the station glowed like a newborn star. Then Thorne redirected the entire energy pulse directly into the heart of the Void Echo. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The darkness convulsed, its amorphous form suddenly constrained by the resonance pattern. A silent scream seemed to vibrate through space itself as the entity was forced into a fixed dimension, becoming momentarily visible, vulnerable. "All weapons, fire on the target coordinates." Forlag commanded. Every operational weapon in the Cthar fleet opened fire on the now visible entity. The concentrated bombardment tore into the Void Echo's temporarily solidified form. Space itself seemed to tear and mend repeatedly as the entity fought against the dimensional constraints forced upon it. Then, with a final silent convulsion, the Void Echo collapsed in upon itself, leaving behind only a rapidly dissipating energy signature and an eerie silence. On the Cthar flagship, disbelief mingled with exhaustion. Sensor confirmation. Vorlag demanded. The entity has dispersed, Admiral, reported the science officer. Residual energy readings are fading rapidly. It appears to have been forced back to its own dimensional plane or possibly destroyed entirely. Vorlag turned his attention to Minerva. The small station was barely recognizable, its structure warped and partially melted from the enormous energy that had coursed through it. Life signs? He asked quietly. After a moment of scanning, the response came, one faint human life sign detected, Admiral. Barely registering. Dispatch medical teams immediately, Vorlag ordered, and notify Earth authorities of the situation. Hours later, Vorlag stood in the makeshift medical bay established on Minerva. The station had been stabilized by Cthar engineers, though would never be fully operational again. On a bed surrounded by medical equipment lay Dr. Eris Thorne, unconscious but alive, attended by both Cthar and recently arrived human medical personnel. Prognosis? Vorlag asked the Cthar chief medical officer. He will recover, Admiral, though not without lasting effects. The neural strain was significant, but his mind remains intact, which is remarkable given the exposure levels. Vorlag nodded, studying the human's face. In repose, Thorne looked smaller, more vulnerable, yet Vorlag had witnessed a strength of will and intellect that rivaled anything in his experience. Earth authorities had responded with understandable confusion and alarm to the situation. The sudden appearance of a Cthar invasion fleet, followed immediately by reports of cooperation against an existential threat, had thrown their command structures into chaos. Diplomatic channels were now opening, tentative and cautious. 2 days later, Thorne regained consciousness. Vorlag was notified immediately and returned to Minerva. Admiral, Thorne greeted him weakly, voice hoarse. Your fleet. Still here, I see. Yes, Vorlag confirmed. Though not as conquerors. Thorne managed a small smile. Change of career plans? The High Command has been persuaded of the benefits of re-evaluating our expansion strategies in this sector, Vorlag replied carefully. Recent events have demonstrated that our intelligence on Earth was severely lacking. You mean you didn't know one sleep-deprived astrophysicist with a caffeine addiction could hijack your entire fleet? Thorne attempted to laugh, but it turned into a painful cough. Among other revelations, Vorlag acknowledged with what might almost have been humor. Your species has potential we had not anticipated. And the void echo. No trace remains, though we maintained sensor sweeps as a precaution. Your calculations and methods were impressive. Thorne closed his eyes briefly. Good. That's good. The Cthar Dominion fleet will be withdrawing from your solar system within the next 30 hours, Vorlag informed him. Diplomatic representatives will remain to establish formal contact protocols with Earth authorities. First contact via near-apocalypse, Thorne used. Not how the movies depicted it. Vorlag didn't understand the reference, but continued. The saboteurs within our ranks have been dealt with according to our laws. Commander Vrex and his primary conspirators will face justice upon our return. They were just trying to protect their people, Thorne said quietly. In their position, I might have done the same. Vorlag considered this. Perhaps. Nevertheless, they violated their oaths and endangered the fleet. A comfortable silence fell between them. Two beings from vastly different worlds who had, against all probability, found common purpose. I never asked, Thorne said eventually. Why did you decide to trust me? You could have retreated, left the solar system to its fate. Vorlag was silent for a long moment. In 3 centuries of service, I have conquered many worlds, faced many enemies. But never have I encountered someone who, when faced with an overwhelming hostile force, responded by attempting to save that force from a greater threat. He paused. It was not a response I had been trained to anticipate. Thorne smiled weakly. Well, I couldn't very well let you all be consumed by an interdimensional horror, could I? Even if you were planning to conquer my planet. Seemed rude. Indeed, Vorlag replied, the closest he would come to acknowledging the humor. Rest now, Dr. Thorne. Your world authorities are eager to debrief you once you are recovered. I bet they are, Thorn muttered. Years of ignoring my warnings, and now this. His eyes were growing heavy again, the medications taking effect. Forlag turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. Dr. Thorn, he said, the Kthar have an ancient saying. An enemy faced becomes a comrade known. You have taught my people a valuable lesson. Glad to be. Educational, Thorn murmured as he drifted back to sleep. The next day, as the Kthar fleet prepared for departure, Forlag stood on his flagship's bridge, watching as Earth grew smaller on the viewscreen. The invasion that was meant to be another simple conquest had become something entirely different, a turning point not just for Earth, but potentially for the Kthar Dominion itself. Course laid in, Admiral, reported the navigation officer. Awaiting your command. Forlag nodded. Proceed. As the massive fleet began its departure, communications received one final transmission from Minerva. It was a simple message from Thorn. Next time, call ahead. I'll put the coffee on. For the first time in many years, Admiral Forlag permitted himself a small smile. On Minerva, still recovering in the medical bay, Thorn watched the Kthar fleet depart on a makeshift screen installed by his bed. As the last ships vanished into the darkness of space, he noticed an alert on one of his few remaining functional sensors, a faint, unfamiliar signal from beyond Pluto's orbit. Different from the void echo, but equally intriguing. He reached for his tablet, wincing at the pain, but driven by irrepressible curiosity. Whatever waited out there in the vastness of space, humanity would no longer face it alone.